Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and I have gone back to Ilona Andrews because I figured I'd try another of her books, and I haven't finished the book that I was going to be doing for this week, so yeah. I am going to take a moment to note I have hit 500 subscribers. Thank you to everybody who has subscribed. And yeah, to whoever actually shows up to listen to this video, even if you click away in 38 seconds flat, thank you. Yeah, so, it only took us years and years to get here. And yeah, I think that's all I really have to say because let's be honest, in these days of million subscriber videos, 500 seems a little unprepossessing, but I nonetheless appreciate that I have reached one of those major benchmarks on the way to becoming noticed outside of an incredibly tiny corner of of YouTube. So Iron and Magic is a part one of a sub-trilogy that I believe has not yet been written other than this first book, and it's a sub-trilogy because it is part of a main series that I have not read. The book description indicates that you can read this as a standalone, and it does seem to me, at least, to work as a standalone, in that one will be aware of this Kate Daniels series and the ability to get broader context and outside story if one so desires, but it hasn't really seemed necessary, which is good because, it's important for books in a series to be standalone enough that you can pick up at any point in the series and read it without sitting there wondering what's even happening. This is, of course, one of my big problems with modern television, is that we have taken something that was episodic and made it into ongoing mini-series, except they're season-long series, and I understand the attraction on the one hand, but at the same time, I feel like you have taken away from people's ability to pick something up in the middle by making a show entirely unapproachable if you haven't watched everything from the beginning. This is a problem with the latter seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, with latter seasons of Supernatural, with, many, many series going on. So it's nice, and so in this book series, as opposed to, TV, we'll go back to talking about books, it's really nice that this stands on its own so that you can pick this up. And I decided to pick this up because I had finished reading what the library had of the Innkeeper series. I don't know if there are any more books published as yet. I suspect that the next one will get published whenever it is that the husband and wife team that makes up Ilona Andrews, whenever they finish the latest collection of updates in their internet published serial, when they actually have enough, they'll publish a new book. But this is interesting because, first of all, it's much, much darker in tone than the Innkeeper series. The Innkeeper series, obviously it has its dark moments, but it is very much more lighthearted. Among other things, it's not set in a post-apocalyptic world, and this is set in post-apocalypse. This is set in a world where, at some point in the relatively recent past, it's set more or less contemporaneously to our own time, roughly, but in the relatively recent past, at some point, basically, there had been no magic for millennia, centuries, however long it had been, and magic resurges. And what happens is that completely unbalances everything, because when magic surges, it takes out a lot of technology. It's like you've taken an EMP to everything. It's the TV series Dark Angel, where ostensibly in, I believe it was 2010, that there was a mass EMP and it took out everything. And that, basically anything that ran on a computer chip got taken out, and the US is thrown back into being, very briefly into being a society without electronics. And because it crashed and destroyed the entire economy and so on and so forth, you have that after effect. In this case, you have that effect, but you have this resurgence of magic at the same time. And so you also have this interesting world-building notion of there being waves, where sometimes magic is in ascendance and the technology stops working, and sometimes tech is in ascendance and the magic mostly stops working. And these alternating waves sort of keep things, in a way, technologically stagnant, because you can't make progress in either aspect or make too much progress, because things keep on crashing when the next wave comes, either way. So this book is telling the story of the man who was sort of the right hand of the primary antagonist of this Kate Daniels series. Basically, he had been raised from childhood that he was a street kid. And this man who was, at the start of, in the distant past, is the man who was known as Nimrod, which is weird. But anyways, he comes back and calling himself Roland. And what happens is that he finds a boy who has been living on the streets who has a great amount of magic potential, and he names the kid Hugh, and Hugh didn't really have a name. He'd kind of been, called boy or kid or whatever, but he renames him Hugh and takes him with him and raises him. And we find out later on in this book that he didn't just raise him to be loyal because, you take a street kid off the street, you give him a home and education and training and so on and so forth, and he's likely to be extremely loyal, but that he had also used magic that was addictive in nature to effectively override any opinions Hugh had that conflicted with his own. That, he walks up to Hugh, and Hugh, the first time he sees him as sort of a benevolent, kindly god. And when Hugh messes up in the course of one of these Kate Daniels books, Roland cuts Hugh off from this ongoing, clearly addictive magic feed that he'd been giving him, and then throws him out. Hugh has basically been kept on a metaphorical drug since his childhood, and has been thrown out of the home by his effectively father figure, who has never actually said to him, yeah, I'm your dad. He's just strung him along with that. So between these two things, we open the book, after the prologue explaining this, we open the book with Hugh depressed and trying to drink himself to death because he's suffering the after effects of this addiction and losing his home and losing somebody he saw as a father figure in just this one incredibly cruel blow. And because he was the general of the so-called Iron Legion, they had put their faith and had followed him. They were faithful to him. They weren't faithful to Roland. And so when Roland's left-hand man starts hunting them down, they track Hugh down and basically drag him out of his days of alcoholism and demand that he rescue them. And he does, in effect, by him and his scouts finding this woman. You see the two of them on the cover, this white-haired woman, who is running a sort of a weird, extensive commune in a castle out in rural America, because this takes place in post-apocalyptic America. And they form an alliance, they marry, and they make a big public display outwardly to people that they are a happy couple, and they set up shop together with his Iron Legion to defend her people, and her people provide his Iron Legion with home and resources. And after that, this book has this plot of the two of them sort of figuring out how to survive various assaults on things and making strategic arrangements and alliances and whatnot. But the rest of this book is a classic romance novel of the two people who come together in a fake relationship that hate each other and eventually work through that hating each other to actually fall in love, and so on and so forth. And this is a romance novel that's written like a romance novel, which is distinct from the Innkeeper series, which is a novel that has some romance in it that's written like a romance novel, but doesn't actually quite feel like a romance novel. And it's a weird, sort of wobbly thing that Innkeeper series does, whereas this feels much more comfortable in that way, because it's darker than that. It has its humorous moments, it's much darker than Innkeeper, as I said. But it's also a much more settled read because you don't read it feeling like you're in the wrong genre. This is a fantasy romance novel. Straight up fantasy romance novel, and you cannot call it urban romance because urban fantasy because there's nothing urban in it. They're in backwoods America the whole time. But it's kind of bog standard. It's not bad. It's a good, solid, entertaining read. There's nothing here that's remarkably stand out in it, but if you like this sort of thing, if you like the paranormal fantasy romance genre, then it's a good time. The back and forth between the two of them, between Hugh and what's-her-noodle that he marries, whose name I can't remember off the top of my head because I take no notes and never remember names. The romance between them is fine. I feel that there is a little much of cutting off the nose to spite the face that goes on between them, that their power plays are a little aggravating. As an example, he makes demands for certain resources to be allocated to his people so they can build up defenses, and she understandably balks at it because they have limited resources, limited money, and she has to feed and house all of these people, and it means that they cannot just pour unlimited funds into defenses because they will not have funds then for all the other stuff they need. And so he manages to negotiate various ways to get access to bulldozers that he needs to set up the various defenses. And when she pulls them away, and he demands to know, and he says, you gave me 3 days with these, and she's like, I didn't say when you get those 3 days, why don't you just ask them why? And he finds out that she's pulled it away because they need on an emergency basis to expand the sanitation, the effectively sewer system around the castle, and she didn't just tell him this, she made a snide power play about it, and he does the same thing to her back several times, and it's really aggravating because it messes with the administration. It's bad administratively, and that bothers me. Because it's exceedingly impractical for a good leader to do this. Anyways, Yeah. I think that's everything that I'm going to say, because I'm hitting the end of my self-imposed time limit, so that's everything, and I will see you all next week.